Well, hello, and welcome back to that thing we call Curlis Mania. Man, where we talk all things prog rock and pop. We are on a rock tear lately, which is really making me happy. Hard rock, which is really making me happy. We did Van Halen last week, and this week we are here to talk about, as Peter and I are both flying the colors, the mighty AC/DC. So before I do anything else, I want to introduce my guest who is I'm just welcoming him back to the channel. Very fortunate for me. He's back. And his name is Peter Jones. Welcome, Peter.
Tom, the pleasure is all mine. Thank you for having me back.
So happy to have you back.
Pleasure's mine.
Yes, absolutely. And he just wisely, we were kind of going back and forth about what we were going to do with AC/DC, and then he insisted. He's like, no, we're doing Bond versus Bond, which the more I listened to these records, I was like, you know what, Peter was absolutely right. We are here to talk about two albums that don't get talked about a lot: Let There Be Rock versus Powerage.
Or the old,
The old Let There Be Rock. Look at that. That's
the
the
alternate
Australian,
cover.
right?
That's right.
So Um, so we were just talking about that, how the AC/DC catalog Bond, especially Bond era, gets kind of chopped up, and it's so confusing for someone who from the US. You're like, wait, what, when you go back and as we talked about, when you're looking, we'll get to all this, but when you go back and try to find the AC/DC Bond era, you're like, it's confusing because there's a lot of different versions. Um, but we are talking, at least I think we're talking about international version, right? Of each of these, right?
Yeah, the international of Let There Be Rock, and I think we were using whatever. There was a U.S. version of Powerage. Yeah, it was Australian and U.S. was the same. So
Yeah, I think Powerage was the first album that was pretty consistent, right? I think.
if we're off, we'll so what?
Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. We're talking about, some great music. Doesn't matter. So, okay, before we get into this battle, I'm just going to do a very quick, brief history, just running up to Let There Be Rock. So, of course, as we all know, AC/DC started out as another, as with Van Halen, another brother thing where, Malcolm and Angus Young, who grew up, I believe, were transplanted to Sydney, Australia.
Yes.
The band started in 1973, went through many lineups until in September 1974 they found a great, perfect lead singer in Bon Scott. Um, they recorded their first LP, High Voltage, in November 1974. Um, it was produced by two gentlemen by the name of Harry Vanda and George Young, which was I believe, their
Their older brother. Yes.
older brother, who were also part of the band The Easy Beats.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So,
That's an Australian group. Yeah.
which is what did they have a hit with Friday on My Mind? Was that the
I
song?
don't know them specifically. I just know the band.
Yeah,
Uh,
I'm not sure, but anyway, they were sort of a famous band for a while. They recorded in this place called Albert Studios in Sydney, and it basically, I believe it was top 20 in Australia, High Voltage, when it came out. Um, because they were a hardworking band. They played all over the place. They never turned down a gig. They would just play anywhere, anytime. And they just got some momentum just from playing live. So, so the second studio LP was called TNT, and that was released in December 1975. They then signed with Atlantic Records in 1976. I believe Phil Carson was the guy at Atlantic that signed them. And the first LP to have international distribution was called High Voltage in 1976, and that was a combination of the two I just mentioned. It was a combination of High Voltage, the original High Voltage, and TNT. Um, the third studio LP was called Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap, was released in October 76. But to make things even more confusing, I don't believe it was released until 81 in the US.
that sounds about right.
Because they were like, okay, Black and Black just made it huge. Now we're going to release Dirty Deeds in 81 with
Right.
a different cover. It's like the whole thing's so confusing. So
Right.
anyway, then they did a brief tour of Europe, and then in January 77 they began recording their LP number 4, which was to be called Let There Be Rock.
Right.
Now I just want to make one last quick, that was a very quick synopsis, but I'm going to do one last comment, and I'm sure you'd mention this too, but um, Mark Evans plays bass on Let There Be Rock,
That's correct.
and he was let go, fired, let go, I don't know, left, whatever it was, soon after this record was released, and Cliff Williams stepped in for Powerage, which that became sort of like the first classic lineup of AC/DC. So that's where I'm going to leave it. And now I'm gonna hand it over to Peter for his take on Let There Be Rock.
Well, it's interesting because when we were looking at the cover, you know, their logo is different here.
Yep.
You know, we get the one that we're used to, and there it is. I mean, there's the iconic.
Oh yeah.
That's the one everybody knows.
Yeah. That's a
And
cool cover. I love that. This cover is great.
yeah, you know, and here's the thing, and you know, like we were talking off camera, you know, this is a band that I just almost solely focus on musically. The backstories, you know, it's not a band I really ever decided to dive that deep into as to who did what, because they're pretty simple band,
Yeah.
pretty straightforward band, and you know, everything just comes out in their albums, and I love that it's music focus music, and that's what I'm going to deal with today. This is a band whose identity is unapologetic. It is uncompromising. I have never heard the word sellout with AC/DC, only in capacity for seats. You know, this is, they are so true to themselves and so authentic to themselves. It really makes it fun to compare albums because there's not these huge swings, these, you know, big right turns where all of a sudden they went where? No.
None of that. Yeah.
What to me, we're going to be kind of nitpicking, you know, little subtle things, which is why I think this makes these two albums specifically really hard to judge because they're so much alike.
Yes.
You know,
that's exactly the way I felt.
Yeah, and that's just so great about it. And you know, I was fortunate enough to play with a really high quality AC/DC tribute band in Chicago before I moved out here to North Dakota. And you know, I'll infuse some of my experiences with that into some of the things that we're doing here. You know, we jump right into the opening track, and the first thing that I think about with AC/DC is that even though they're transplanted, this is almost as an American sounding band as you could get, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. There is no European influences here. This is not, there's no prog, there's none of that. I don't even hear the elements of Sabbath. I don't hear Purple. I don't hear Zeppelin.
Yeah.
This is way more Chuck Berry.
Right.
Than it is any of those bands that we talked about. Mm-hmm. It's the blues. This is authentic.
Bluesy. Yeah.
Heavy, interpretative, you know, classic early rock and roll. Mm-hmm. And they keep it all the way throughout. And I'm just going to start out with this first track going down that there's no other band that I can think of, and this is confirmed as I was learning these tracks to play them in the band, there's no other band that uses quarter note bass drum patterns as much as AC/DC does. Yeah. Everything is thump, 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 thump all the way through. Very little delineation. Every once in a while, he'll do an eighth note, but it really stands out because you're like, oh, that wasn't a quarter note. Go Down is a nice heavy shuffle but not with a traditional shuffle bass drum pattern, just all quarter notes. Mm-hmm. And it really, really drives. And the whole track, it just kind of moves forward. And there's another element here that I think is common. And I don't know if you agree or not. Their verses are straightforward. It usually has a very consistent, but almost minimalistic backing track. Bon is the focus. He is
Yes.
carrying everything. His lyrics, his interpretations, his nuances. I just saw something today where Bruce Dickinson was talking about Bon, and he said he was such a flexible singer. And I think that's a great analogy. He could alter his voice. He could get heavy or edgy, and then he could get that hell kind of thing and be like, oh, wait a second. But he had a lot of color to his voice.
He did, yeah.
But very strong when it needed to be.
Yeah.
But they would get to the verses, and Go Down is a perfect example. Now the syncopations come in. Go down, go down, go down, go down, go down.
Yeah.
Right back to the verse. Just straight.
So simple. So simple.
And so there's really not too much to talk about, riffage or that kind of thing. There's a dual lead or a double lick. No. It is this beautiful interplay between Malcolm, who was a master rhythm player. Let's just call spade a spade.
Yeah.
One of the all-time greats.
God, yeah.
And Angus, who is, I call him the color guy. He can dance in and out of it. He can complement. He can play it in a different register. He'll make maybe a different part. And it's not really, you would never call it like a twin lead. It's not a Thin Lizzy. It's not a Maiden. It's not a Priest, Scorpions, anything like that.
Right.
And so they were able to come in and out. And the thing about this Bon era is there's a lot of double entendres. It's overtly sexual at times, sometimes unapologetically.
Oh, yeah.
It's not like they're trying to trick you. They're just, and there it is. And when they get to the solo sections, they usually just repeat the verse underneath. And he solos over the top. So there's not like this bridge section like in a Priest, where it'll go off on a separate tangent and then it'll come back. But a lot of times where they'll make a delineation is that they'll do a breakdown, and they'll get even more minimalistic. It'll be just drums and bass, and then Bon will either talk over it, and then it'll build back to the chorus, and they'll finish. I mean, Go Down's just a song that feels great.
Yeah.
It just is uplifting, and it makes you move, and it's super well executed. And before I go any further, if I don't talk about Phil Rudd, I'm going to get hit by lightning.
You don't, I will.
Oh, I've said this on other shows, and I'll say it again. I've been drumming for 51 years. I have my degrees in music and everything. I consider myself a pretty competent player, if I may say. Playing in the AC/DC tribute band was the most challenging drum job I've ever had.
Oh, interesting. Really? Yeah.
Because it is so unison driven. It is so tight. The unison parts are band unisons. Everybody does everything together. And if you make an extra fill or get a little bit lazy in your head and lose your focus and want to put in something maybe a little more arty or creative, you're going to stand out like you're naked in Times Square. Because there is
That's great, Peter. That's hilarious.
There is nowhere to hide.
Yeah.
In these songs, just nowhere.
Yeah.
You literally almost have to learn these as close to note as you possibly can. So you don't make mistakes and expose yourself in an area where you're just like, no. So anywho, that was a lot for the first song. We'll cruise through the rest of these here.
Okay.
Dog Eat Dog. Here they changed styles and opens with Bon. Well, it's a dog eat, and then a nice tom feel, nice. But there's that bass drum, boom, boom, boom.
4 on the floor.
4 on the floor. They go through the verses and the pre-chorus, and then in all of a sudden the chorus, which is only 2 lines, here comes the full band. And now the backbeat's in and it's got big heaviness, and then right back.
Yeah.
And then it goes right back in, and they go through another verse and another chorus, and they get to these beautiful sections. And here's one of the places where that if you're not familiar with the song to such a degree of comfort, you're going to make mistakes. They get to the solo. The drums are going 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, crash, crash. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, crash, crash. And if you don't know that those crashes are on 2 and 3, they're not on 1. They're not.
Yeah.
They don't. You've got to do that, or they're doing one
apart.
thing and you're doing something else, and it just
Yeah.
doesn't sound right.
Yeah.
Back to the toms. It's, eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth. It's a lie. That's the truth. See the blind man on the street. Bond's lyrics are very, very interesting.
They really are.
Sometimes they make no sense. Sometimes you're like, I get it. And other times, you're like, I got to read between maybe.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure where they're going with that.
Yeah.
And they really kind of just ride that tom pattern out through towards the end of the song, and it's so simple.
Yeah.
So straightforward. But it's got a ton of energy. And I think it's just done so beautifully. And I like how different that feels from the shuffle of going down to start. So we've got two kind of real distinct rhythm patterns here. Then, of course, we get to one of the mainstay tracks, Let There Be Rock. And in their Brian era, I have very, very few songs that I can think of that were played up tempo like this one was. And holy smokes. And what I wrote down here, endurance test. Yeah. Holy smokes, is this drum part hard to play?
Yeah.
No click track. No, nothing. Phil is just a machine. Just, oh my God. Heavy. Now, I will.
And even when it comes down, he's still going. He's still.
Yes.
Yeah.
And he even starts syncopating. Boom, boom, boom,
yeah.
Teasing on this television every night, heard it on the radio, and then it's just, it is just so heavy. I think I may have done riff raff there. Sorry, they're at the same tempo.
Right.
But it is so cool, and obviously the lyrics in the beginning, back in 1955, there's our Chuck Berry.
There it is.
It is.
Yeah.
The influences are wore on their sleeves for you to see in full praise. They're going, this is it.
Yep.
And
he told Tchaikovsky the news. I mean, because
we had rollover Beethoven, tell Tchaikovsky, right? And the white man had the schmaltz, the black man had the blues, and he said, let there be sound, let there be light, let there be drums, let there be rock.
Yeah.
And then it just drives and drives and drives. Oh my God, it's relentless. It is just, it's just so strong.
And don't they just hold one chord for a while on this one? Isn't this the one where it's just kind of like,
and then they're like, na, 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 na.
Yeah.
Bling.
Yes.
Right back into it. Yeah. And then they get down to the section, and the solo sections are so cool. And you really have to know how to count where those changes come in for the chord changes, because there's really nothing to break them up. It's just all the same over and over and over. And like, oh, there's the chord change. And a lot of times they don't follow 8 or 4 bar or 12 bar phrases. Sometimes they've in other songs, they'll use 6. And you're like, oh, I got to make a note of that, because it's not 8 bars. You think you know where you are automatic. Nope, they come in after 6, and you're like, okay, that was a nice change.
Yeah.
But like I said, I wrote Chuck Berry on steroids. I think it's just an absolute epic classic AC/DC track.
Oh yeah.
And this is very unique to the Bond era because I just don't hear this kind of song in the Brian period.
Mhm.
I just
Yeah,
didn't.
that's a good point. That's a great point. You don't hear it
Those
anymore.
were those were much more slowed down, mid to slower mid tempos.
Yeah.
Um, and then here we go to finish off side one, and we get to Bad Boy Boogie, and then now we have a completely fourth style. And
Bam.
what's so cool about it is that riff plays over the bar line. And then they hit it together. On the day I was born, the rain fell down. Oh, holy God. And they just follow the blues scale. 1, 4, 5, back. It's so easy.
Yeah.
I don't mean easy to play,
Right.
to execute, because simple does not mean easy to execute.
Right.
In fact, easy is sometimes the hardest.
Yes, indeed. Indeed.
But again, you get to the choruses, they say stop, I say go. And do the Bad Boy Boogie. Over top. And back into it. They go back over it. And then they hit a breakdown. And then off
The heartbeat thing. Yeah.
off goes Angus. They do the exact same rhythmic pattern they did in the verse, and they did and we would just milk that live. He'd just be
And the longer you milk it, everyone's like, like everyone loves it. Yeah.
And each verse, Bond gets a little more intense, and his vocals get a little more edgy. I was born to love till the day I die. I just line them up and I knock them down. It is just, and then they get the very little kind of, I want to call it a backing vocal. It's kind of the little shout thing. Bad boy boogie, bad boy. You can see Malcolm up there bopping.
Yeah.
With his garage. So you're like, off he goes. And a nice tight ending, and you're like, that's a pretty damn good side of an album.
Oh God, yeah, that first side, yeah.
And then we get to Problem Child. Great feel, perfect tempo. I'm hot, and when I'm not, I'm cold as ice. Get out of my way, just step aside or pay the price. Everything
great lines, man. Those are great lines. They really are.
And what I want, I take. What I don't, I break. And I don't want you.
Yeah. Yep.
Every story that I'd ever heard, and Ronnie Dio used to talk about him. He's like, the last guy you would ever want to get into an alley fight with is Bon Scott.
Oh, really? Okay.
He was notorious as the baddest MF,
like a brawler.
Oh my God, yes. Yeah. And of course, if you put a little in him,
a little alcohol, exactly. Yep. Which he did quite often.
And it's just so cool. And they get to this middle section, and when they bring maracas, God, just picks the whole track up.
Totally it ups it.
It just all of a sudden has this even more propulsion to it. And I think this is an underrated track. And I just think it is
I love Problem Child, man. One of my favorites.
And they repeat a lot. They 1, 2, then they get Problem Child, go through again, Problem Child 3, 4 times. But it never seems to get stale, because it's just kind of got so much energy to it, and it is just really kind of fun.
That's hilarious, Peter, because one of my notes was, does it need to be 550?
It goes so quickly though.
It does, yeah, but it doesn't, it was a
You
little
could
bit
have
of like,
cut, you
yeah,
could have trimmed a few of those choruses
yeah,
off the end there.
yeah,
Yeah, and it would probably been a little more cleaned up a
yeah,
bit.
yeah.
And then one of the absolute favorite tracks on the album for me, Overdose. Oh, I love this. I love the opening
I
guitar.
love Overdose.
Na, 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 na. He's just like almost kind of arpeggiating. Clap,
Yeah.
bah, the punchy chords. Bah, boom, boom, bam, bah, and then four on the floor, you're Phil,
Yep.
I never smoked me no cigarettes. I never drank much booze, but I'm only a man, don't you understand? And a man can sometimes lose. Interesting. This is almost like Phil Lynott singing "I've Got to Give It Up." You
Yeah,
know,
that's great. That's a great analogy. Yeah.
you're like, oh, okay, you know,
Yeah.
coffee kettle, you're both black,
Yeah. Yeah.
and he's like, is he aware? Is he being self-deprecating? What is he saying? Is he recognizing these things in himself? Or what is he saying?
He
But
goes
he's
from like
trying,
complete bravado, like you were saying in earlier tracks, to like maybe a little bit of vulnerability happening. Like, whoa. Yeah.
yeah, pulled me down with you, hit me up, big hunk of love, hope you pull me through. I overdosed on you. And there's where the great syncopations are again.
Yeah.
And they do the band and the band, and they get to the last part and they syncopated on a different beat. And because you anticipate it to go to the same one and it doesn't,
Doesn't. Yeah. Right.
it displaces by a beat, and you're like, that's so freaking cool.
It is, it
It's
is
so
great.
simple. It's so subtle, but it makes such a huge difference. I love how it breaks down again and then it just builds. I overdose on you and it just builds and builds and builds and drives to the end. And I love the way that tune feels. And that was one of the ones that was so much fun to play. Hell Ain't a Bad Place to Be, classic. It's classic. It's
Yeah.
just vintage AC/DC, straightforward, to the point. 414, kind of perfect length.
Yep.
It's there's nothing really to say extraordinary about it, like say, oh, here, go here, and they go do this. It's more of the same. But in this case, this is maybe the only band, Tom, where I say that's okay. It's it's more
It's
of the
all right.
same. Well,
Yeah.
hey, I mean, if you like steak, eat more steak.
Right. Bring it on.
I mean, like, it's okay
Yeah.
because it just so works.
When it's a perfect steak and it's done perfectly, you're like, bring it on.
Yes, and it's end of the night, turn down the light, closes up on me, opens my heart, tears it apart, brings out the devil in me. It's the hell ain't a bad place to be, and it's just got, you could kind of interchange this with maybe a dozen other Bond era mid-tempo tracks, and they would kind of all interchange and work.
Right.
I just accept the track as it is. And I'm like, okay, it works. And I think that's an awesome, awesome song as well. There are no bad tracks on this record.
Right.
And then
Agreed.
of course we get to the big heavy one at the end, Whole Lot of Rosie. The riff. The riff.
I mean, who doesn't love that?
Oh, well, let me tell you a story about a woman I know. 42, 39, 56. You can say she's got it all and then off to the races. It does not stop.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. It doesn't.
And even when they get to when they reiterate that opening riff, it feels even heavier. And then a lot of soloing, a lot of going over the just repetitive driving, simple, straightforward rock and roll. And I appreciate it for what that is. And I just, it's a great way to end the album. I thought the sequencing on this record was really strong. All the tracks are, I think, in the right place. I wouldn't switch or change any of them around. And I was lucky that through the course of various sets, I've played the whole album live.
Yeah.
So it's so much fun, and it's such a great record. So,
Yeah. I mean, Whole Lot of Rosie stayed in the set list, right, for years.
oh yeah.
I mean, that just never left the set. I mean, it's so good live. I mean, you see, there's like clips on YouTube. You see them playing it live, and it's like, oh my god, it's so
Right.
powerful. It's just
It is.
powerful.
It's just, and you get the crowd to scream in the middle of it. Na, 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 Angus, Angus, na, na, na,
Right? Yes. Yes.
Angus,
Exactly.
Angus, na, 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 and it's and this is the one that just, I know Brian does a great job with it. I'm not going to compare Brian and Bon in this episode,
Right.
but this is a signature Bon,
Oh yeah. Yeah.
and his elements are all over it. And so I think from top to bottom, that's a real winner there. That's a good album.
Oh my god, yeah. I mean, it's so primal. It's so just I mean, this one to me, like I was trying to figure out words to describe this record,
Mhm.
and it's just so you were describing it, and like both of us are doing the I mean, we're doing air drums, and I mean,
Yeah,
it just hits you like here, it hits you. It's not going for your head, it's going for your heart and your and
got
maybe below the belt a little bit.
yes, yeah,
Um, it's really going for your id or whatever it is, your
right. Maybe even your super ego. I don't know.
yeah, your
We'll have to ask.
primal, it's primal. It's like this primal vibe that they go for, and they do it so well, and it just hits you and can't resist it.
I think maybe what we're trying to say, Tom, is that it's not over intellectual.
No,
It
no.
is. It's not going over non-musicians' heads.
Hmm.
It is easily absorbed, and like you said, it's almost at the root of a human essence. It's like if you just take drums and go, people go, okay, I get it.
It's exactly the caveman banging on
Yes, you're
rocks.
like, I get it.
Yeah,
And the more straightforward and the more broken down and simplistic in its delivery, the easier for it is to connect.
right,
There's
right,
no pretentiousness here.
right.
No, well, look how great we are as musicians. They are great musicians, but they're not trying to prove it to you.
You don't have to think. You don't have to think
No,
when it's and
no.
but that being said, like you said, there is some Bon Scott street poetry
Mm-hmm.
kind of stuff going on. Like it's where it's you just you go every once in a while you throw out a line, you go, that's brilliant. Like that is brilliant. That's awesome.
Right.
It's like somebody wrote something funny on like a bathroom wall or something,
Yes.
you know?
That's almost kind of how they are.
Yeah.
Back street alley kind of drinking brawlers.
Yeah, 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 and you're just like that, but sometimes there's some great wisdom comes out from that stuff. Um,
Almost like the anti-rock star.
yeah, exactly, exactly. So Bond just personifies it. Um, anyway, so I wrote down some words. I'm not going to get too far into the album because you did such a great job encapsulating it. But I was trying to figure out what about AC/DC do I like? Like, because you listen to these records and you're like, what is it that's hitting me? And I'm trying to intellectualize something that probably doesn't need to be intellectualized. But basically, I wrote down ballsy, bluesy. It's got swing. It's like sometimes it sounds stonesy at times,
Mm-hmm.
or like Aerosmith or a little bit or something. Or ZZ Top. Like there's times where I go, oh, almost hear like a little bit of ZZ Top or something. The guitar riffs, I mean, excellent riffs, right? Classic, and you mentioned this, classic early rock and roll on steroids,
Yeah.
you know? Um,
And I think, to not interrupt, but sorry,
no, go ahead. I'm done. That was
the
my rant.
the elements of those bands you just mentioned that are most accessible are when they go in the blues area.
Yeah. Yep.
AC/DC, the Stones, they're and ZZ Top. It's back to American black blues,
Mhm.
early rock and roll.
Yeah.
That's who they are.
Yeah. Yep.
It went to the Stones. Aerosmith got it from the Stones.
Yep.
and the elements of that were in the Yardbirds
Yeah.
becomes Aerosmith, and ZZ Top was always into it.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, listen to ZZ Top's first record. It's just blues, like
Yeah.
crazy blues. It's like Cream
Yeah.
and Willie Dixon and who knows? I mean, there's a bunch of stuff mixed in there, but that's it. I'm gonna keep it real brief and just say I really enjoy this record. I think it just kicks you in the balls basically and says go home. It's like you 8 songs and it's just like boom 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 boom. Like you were saying, you already said it all. I think it's interesting to move on to Powerage from 1978 because I do think there's some subtle. I'm just going to open it up by saying I think there's some subtle changes,
There are
very subtle, but there are some subtle things that are changing about this album a little bit. Would you
cool
agree?
cover, by the way.
Would you agree?
It's a great cover.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And I'm sorry, I missed your exact question.
Oh no, the question being like, do you agree that there's some subtle changes?
Oh yes, there's no
Yeah.
question.
Yeah.
And again, a little different logo even than what was on this, if we're keeping timeline correct. Even
Yeah.
a little bit that's like they're still refining it.
Yeah, they are. Exactly.
Haven't figured it out yet. And of course, the electricity theme is really running through here. You know,
like you said, awesome cover. I love this cover. It's really
great. Hands with the cabling and everything in it, and his face is that that one you might where he makes the little devil horns. Yeah, they just look like a bunch of brawlers, don't
look
they?
like a street gang, exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, you would never confuse them as the highfalutin rock star guys.
Not at all. Not at all.
And I think they probably weren't even remotely interested in any of that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So as you mentioned, we now have Cliff in the band.
Right. Yep.
And do you want me to dive in here?
Go ahead, God, dive in. Have at it.
Right.
Yep.
Well, Rock and Roll Damnation, big opening power chords. That's one of their staples. They open songs with big chords, or it's a driving mid-tempo, straight ahead. But I did ask this first question: where's the bass? I can't hear it.
Yeah.
Not on this track.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm like, it's a little thin in the bottom end.
It's thin. Exactly.
Yeah. Certainly versus Let There Be Rock. Let There Be Rock had a much tighter, bigger low end to it. Simple, just like we said before, versus straightforward. They say that you play too loud. Well, baby, that's tough. It's da da da. It's just straight through. But then it's Rock and Roll Damnation, and then here comes the syncopations. Take your chance while you still got the choice, and back connection back through it. I do like the breakdown. It just goes to 4 in the quarter notes, and they're kind of breaking it down. And it's a hard life, damnation. They're putting you down, damnation, all over. Yeah, and it just and it builds again, and that's a common theme with them. They'll play big opening, verse, chorus, maybe a solo. They'll break it down, bring it back up, and what I like is that the syncopations start to change as they get towards the end of the song, and they start to change it up, and that's really cool. He's like, I keep turning it up, and I'm like, oh, what are they doing? What are they doing here? What are they doing there? This could have easily fit on the previous record without any trouble. So it's very similar from that standpoint, but from a sonic delivery, that's one of the subtle differences that I'm hearing, that I'm not getting a lot of low end. And I thought the guitar was a bit grittier on the previous record.
Yeah. Is it fair to say, Peter, that Mutt Lange does get the rhythm section happening a little bit more as when he takes over?
I'm going to say yes and no. I have a lot of mixed feelings with Mutt, because when I was listening through these, when you get to especially Highway to Hell, and then listen to a lot of the solo sections in Highway to Hell, and especially in Back in Black, when the solo sections are going, you can hear cymbal crashes on 2 and 4, crash, they're accenting. And well, go listen to Foolin' on Pyromania or any of those other ones that Mutt did. They're exactly the same.
Yeah.
That's what he had Rick Allen doing. Exactly. Right. It's his formula.
That's his thing, yeah.
And what I liked about these previous Mutt ones is that they did it on their own, and they were more judicious about where they were placing those cymbal crashes. It was easier to play the Highway to Hell and Back in Black material because the repetition of the syncopations were more consistent.
Yeah. Yeah.
They were more challenging on the earlier records because they used them less often.
Right.
And I thought that was an interesting way of doing it. So that was part of Mutt's thing.
Yeah.
And Down Payment Blues is really cool. Again, what do we got? Quarter note bass drum patterns, these slow and kind of buildy. Now we've got some bass, eighth note bass notes, which you can hear just beautifully. Cliff's bass sounds great. So I'm like, I wish I had that on the opening track.
I got holes in my shoes.
What's that?
I got holes in my shoes, and I'm way overdue.
Sitting in my Cadillac listening to my radio. I mean, how much easier is that to get a hold of?
Yeah.
It's the full drum pattern comes in on that second section, and they like do a small little breakdown. Like you said, I got holes in my shoes. I'm way overdue. Down Payment Blues. Well, that could be Sonny Boy Williamson. It could be Muddy Waters. It could be
Yep.
Could be any of those. Johnny Lee Hooker, Buddy Guy. Just pick,
down.
Yes, just change the sonics a bit, slow it down, and it's about as authentic as it gets. I thought Angus's solo, his tone on here is more aggressive. This is a bit more razor's edge, if I may use an analogy. It's a little more cutting. Again, great unison syncopations, back to the opening fill. And I'm going to say this because we really haven't talked about it like we do with other bands. And let me qualify this. Angus Young is a tremendous guitar player. Tremendous. However, for me, he does not play what I would call memorable solos. They're feel solos.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Yeah.
You don't really walk around too much other than like the intro to Johnny Be Good or something like that. You don't really sing Chuck Berry solos. You feel them. They're almost like rhythm solos. And that's kind of what I get from Angus. Yes, he does lines, but he's not the guy who's going to throw out this searing melodic, because to me that would take away from the song.
Yeah.
He either, and this is a jazz trait that a lot of jazz musicians do, and I've always told young musicians who play jazz when they're learning how to improv, when you go to play your solos your first time, just play the melody. Just play the original melody as if you are singing. Then find the notes where you want to change and be creative and add the blue notes out of the box and the shapes, the pentatonics, those kinds of things. Get out of those boxes and then make it your own. But learn to play the melody first. And I get the sense that Angus is not trying to introduce another melodic theme here. That would be weird. Blackmore does it. Schenker does it. All these other great, Gilmore does it. They introduce a separate theme that you can sing on your own that may or may not be directly related to the melodic verse or chorus of the song. And so Angus does this kind of totally different thing, and it's uniquely him. And I love what he plays, but like I said, I'm not trying to diminish it, but he's not, I would never call him like an overtly melody driven. He's a licks riff chordal guy.
Yeah, absolutely. No, you're right. It's just a different approach. You know, it's
Yeah,
different.
I mean, you're the guitar player. Does that make any sense?
It made a lot of sense to me. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Like you said, you could sing comfortably numb. I mean, you
Right.
can, there's solos that you can, I always say Elliot Easton of the Cars, you can sing
Sure.
his solos, you know. Uh,
Right.
but like with Angus, not really. It's more just like you said, it's more primal. It's more like there's one song, I can't remember what it is. I think it's on Let There Be Rock where I was laughing because the solo for the first 5 seconds, first like 2 minutes is like one note. It's a ding 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 ding. I can't remember what song it is, but it's hilarious. It's just one note.
Well, yeah. I mean, his soloing in "Let There Be Rock," and as we get to another track here and a couple down, it's got they start with a riff. He may do danga 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 na 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 na, and then he's just like off he goes, and that's it.
Yeah,
And then it's
yeah,
just you know, but he uses a lot of the blues scales, a lot of double stops, a lot of those kind of older traditional blues elemental styles. You would never call him a shredder or any of those kinds of things. That's just
no.
not the kind of no, he's not that kind of player.
But he
You know,
plays with such feeling. It
oh,
gets to you. It gets you, you know.
yeah, he really does. Um,
Anyway.
it's great, and I love at the very end of Down Payment Blues, it switches to this really authentic blues, but it doesn't last long enough for me, and they fade out.
Yeah, they
I'm,
fade out.
I'm like,
Yes.
oh, because it was so cool how they transitioned. It was like, here's our modern version. Oh, here's the original.
Here's the old school version. Yeah.
And it's like, oh, and I was like, crap.
Yeah. That's hilarious.
Um, Give Me a Bullet is great. There's two wonderful guitar parts playing against each other in the opening here. I put just the simplest, straightforward rock and roll there is, and it works. And here this starts to get a little more double entendre, the sexual metaphors, and then but he goes back to this: don't need no drug, I don't need no drink, don't need no drugs, don't need no sympathy. Sooner or later, send me a bill for what she's doing to me.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep.
That's is like, okay, what is the ultimate addiction?
Yeah. Yeah. And again showing a little bit of vulnerability at times, like where it's
Yeah.
like maybe a woman's doing him wrong, like he likes her and she doesn't like him or whatever, you know. It's interesting.
Here's the Chuck Berry operator, long distance, lips on the telephone.
Yep. Yep.
Operator, give me Memphis, Tennessee.
Tennessee.
It's just the
Yeah.
little things that they throw in. And Gillen does it a lot on Speed King and, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Throwing those little throwbacks to the influences. Come tomorrow,
Doesn't Gillen
come.
do the Good Golly Miss Molly or something on
Yeah,
the
that's all
on
in Speed
yeah,
King.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And, come tomorrow, come to grips with being all alone. Like you
Mhm.
said, there's a vulnerability. And as tough guy and as they all are, what role does a woman play in all of this, and how much can they
Mhm.
really control a situation?
Right.
You know, it's just straightforward. I go, and this is what makes this so exciting, but so challenging to play this. It was just so much fun. It's just a fun track, and we need to get to Riff Raff because
Oh, riff raff.
this, this
I
is just massive. Get it on, get it on, get it on, get it on, get it on. The band's just underneath. This
oh,
of
that is just so killer.
this of the albums and the songs that we've done so far, this is the more hard rock riffage.
Yeah. Yeah.
This takes this up to a notch. It has the speed and the intensity of a Let There Be Rock or a Whole Lot of Rosie,
Mhm.
but there's no letting up anywhere in this track. And then
Sledgehammer, man, sledgehammer.
when Bond comes in, see it on the television every night. You hear it on the radio. It's just, then they go, "Riff," and then they go, da, and they've got signature fills. They always do the quarter note, dotted eighth, da 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 da. They do it
They do that a
all
lot. Yeah.
they do that through their whole catalog,
Mhm.
da 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 da, Sin City, da da
Yep.
da.
And
It's all through Back in Black. I mean, that's their riff. Or
yes,
they
that's
go
their thing.
da 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 da
Dun,
da
dun, 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 dun.
da da. Diamonds, and I mean, it's just,
Yeah. Diamonds. Dirt.
yeah, that's what they do. Those are their riffs. I love when it breaks to more soloing. It's super heavy, and then it breaks down. And here's where they only go 6 bars. And then I love those breaks.
Yeah. So tight. It's so tight, man. It's tight.
It is
Yeah.
so easy to want to overplay those
Right.
fills and be flashy. No.
And you've learned it. It's not.
Get out of the
Yeah.
way. Space. And it makes it sound heavier and bigger, that space. Let those drums ring and just pound through them.
Yes.
I just call it a juggernaut. It's just one of the ultimate AC/DC songs. I never tire of hearing this one, and it's just
Never get sick of it.
oh,
Never get sick of it.
it's just so great. And then what happens? We go right in. Ba, da, da, da. Ba, da, dum, ba, 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 ba. Diamonds and dust. Poor man last, rich man first. Lamborghinis, caviar. Chai martinis, Shangri-La. This is all Bon.
Yeah.
This is him painting pictures,
Bring on the dancing girl.
Oh, and of course we get the I'm going in to Sin City.
Yeah.
When the lights are bright, do the town tonight. I want to win. Bam. All on beat 2. It's so heavy.
Yeah.
Don't hit a lot of downbeats in AC/DC. The traditional way to play is you play 8 bars, you go to the 1. Here's a new phrase. AC/DC doesn't do that.
Right.
They'll break it up, and you're like, don't hit 1.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because then if the punch is on 2, you went bang, bang, and that's not right. It's just boom, bang.
It's almost like a hold and then release.
It's a pause. It's a little pregnant pause. Because the drums subtly go, they're going in, down, 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 to send, bam.
Yes.
Bam.
That's on 2.
So
it's on 2.
Cool. And that's so great. And then, of course, they break it down. Ladders and snakes,
Ladders give.
Rich man, poor man, beggar man, thief, Fingers Freddy, you're like, oh my God, you're like, so cool. And it just rushes. And if you are not so perfectly in sync on those punches, it just falls apart.
Yeah.
It just falls apart.
Yeah.
And they drive, and the ending is just
Sin City is so great, man.
Freaking killer. What's next? To the Moon. A nice tom driving beat here. Bass is strong. Bond with just kind of a bass and drum groove going on. It's so bluesed bass. And then when they get to the kind of like the chorus, it's like in double time. All of a sudden, there's 4 on the snare, and you're like, "Oh my God, where did all that energy come from?"
Yeah, what's happening here? Yeah,
and it's like, boom, 4 lines, and it's gone. Right back to the opening feel.
Yep.
And it is so cool. And you get down to the end, and you get to the section where they come out of the second chorus, and they go long arm looking for a fingerprint. One of the very few times they've got a double tracked vocal.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
They add a harmony that Bon does over his original. And I wrote that down. It's very effective because it's not used very often.
Barely ever happens. Yeah.
If we think about it, Bon's vocals are a single line with really no treatment at all.
Mm-hmm.
There's there's not a lot of reverb, a lot of echo or delay. It's tight, and it's clean. Where a lot of bands will add that extra, and they're like, no, because one, they're not going to do it live.
Yeah.
And that's what made them so good live, because it sounded just like the record, because all it was Bon.
Yeah.
And I love that. I didn't mean to hurt the woman of mine. It was a heart attack, And it's like there's always some kind of going back to a relationship, and did somebody do me wrong, or did I do them wrong, or what's going on? Oh baby, say bye. You're right next to the moon and on the moon, and I've been around the moon. This is the first song you can in most of these where they're using the actual word love.
Yeah, right.
That's not a lyric. That's not a word you get a lot from AC/DC.
Usually it's lust.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Love's not one that sticks out.
Yeah.
Gone Shooting, great eighth note mid tempo. It's kind of got a more plucked kind of guitar feel to it, a more pizzicato kind of thing. And of course, that's something that easily shows up in the later albums, the beginning of Rock and Roll Ain't Noise Pollution, songs like that, where they've got that kind of.
Yeah, this kind of feels like where they're going a little bit.
And I wrote down here, while that intro was going on, you can really see Angus doing the duck walk.
Yeah.
He's got it out in front of him with the leg. And again, what is that's Chuck?
Yep.
Chuck Berry.
Yep. Chuck Berry.
Verses are strong, syncopation again in the pre-chorus. The bass and the drums through this thing really just don't even change. And it's so much discipline, and it's just wonderful.
Yep.
And I put down, this is one of the quickest 5-minute songs. I mean, it goes so fast.
Yeah,
I was like,
I don't notice.
There's no way this is 5 minutes.
Such a cool groove. It's such a cool groove.
Yeah. Expressive, much more Chuck Berry, great vibrato, great double stops. I put down that I think the Bon era is much more bluesy, early rock influences. I thought Brian was still blues elemental, but it became more hard rock.
Right.
Not to say that there weren't blues elements there. There are. Up to the Neck. I said it's AC/DC, and it sounds like the rest of the record, which is not a bad thing. It's heavily formulated. It's predictable. Which is actually a great thing.
Mm-hmm.
And they never strayed from their mission statement. There's the running joke that later in their career, someone was talking to Angus about one of their new releases, and he goes, well, I must say, this sounds like the last couple. And Angus goes, only the last couple? Like, they all sound like that. Yeah. Right? And you're just like, that's okay. I mean, if you've got, like we used the food analogy before, if you've got a favorite restaurant, you want it to be the exact same every single time you go.
Yes. When they mess with when a restaurant has a something that you love that you order all the time, and then they change it, you're like,
no. Yeah. And in this case, if it ain't broke, and to the final track, Kicked in the Teeth, we got some a cappella stuff from Bon, and the band kind of calls and responses, a very traditional blues style. Right. And then it gets very up tempo, almost kind of a Let There Be Rock riff raff kind of feel. That 4 on the floor backbeat thing that Phil is so great at. And it's a great way to end the record. And You can't complain. I can't complain about a single track on either one of these records.
Isn't it sound like another breakup song, Kicked in the Teeth, like where he says kicked in the teeth again, like you were unfaithful or something? There's something about the lyrics that we're like, he must have gone through a tough relationship right before this record or something.
Yeah, I mean, you can only write around. I mean, what do you write about? Sex, drugs, and rock and roll, right?
Right, right. Yep, yep.
You
So
know, and they
yeah.
weren't really writing too much about drugs,
No, they weren't really. Not as much as you
but a
would think.
lot about sex and a lot about rock and roll.
Yeah, exactly. Those are the two that they go back to a lot.
That's right.
That's what Bond likes. That's his thing.
Yes.
So yeah, man, that's another great synopsis of that album. And really I do agree. I think side two is kind of where things kind of change a little, just a little slightly bit. Like they kind of move towards the slower groovers. Um, Whereas, this album just feels like it's just they're like you said, it's on like, they're on steroids on this. They're not slowing down at all on this. And this one, they kind of put made just a tiny bit. They slow down like with the cool groovers.
Do you think that the like basically kind of the last two songs more specifically, and maybe What's Next to the Moon, almost sound more like they came from High Voltage or the Dirty Deeds era?
Yes, I agree with you. Yeah, it's a great
They
point.
sounded more throwback to their earlier period.
Agreed. But yeah, I mean, it's tough, man. These are both really good records. And I'm gonna make one last statement, and that is on the 4th of July one year, and we went to Bay City because they have like these awesome fireworks. I'm in Michigan, and they have these awesome fireworks. They're known for the fireworks displays. And we went there, and there's this huge gathering of people waiting for the fireworks to go off. And I hear a live band playing as we get closer. I'm like, that sounds like a live band. Sure enough, it was an AC/DC cover band.
Oh, cool.
And they did the Bond era for the first half, and then the second
Okay.
half they did Brian. And I thought I was gonna love the Brian era because I'm like, and then I was loving the Bond stuff. I was like, oh my
Right.
God, the Bond era is so killer. Live, something about live. It's just so great,
Right.
you
I
know.
agree. I agree.
So
Do we have to
so
pick a winner here?
so yeah, what are you gonna do, man? What are you gonna pick? I mean, I gotta ask you, between these two, what are you gonna do?
Full disclosure, Let There Be Rock is my favorite AC/DC record of the catalog. It's a perfect 10 for me,
Yeah.
top to bottom. It is more varied in styles from track to track. They've got more varied grooves in it. There's more stylistic reaching out and stretching out. The big burners on there, Let There Be Rock, Bad Boy Boogie, Overdose, Whole Lot of Rosie. I mean, hell ain't a bad place to be. I mean, good grief. So that's a 10 for me, but Powerage sits right behind it as my second favorite. And it is only because what you had mentioned a minute ago that I think a little bit of side two does kind of fall down a bit.
Right.
But the highs on Powerage are really strong.
Yeah.
Rock and Roll Damnation, Riff Raff, and Sin City.
Yeah. Yeah.
Great stuff.
Well, it's very similar to Van Halen last week, where it's like, okay, I picked Fair Warning, but Women and Children is killer. I mean, Women and Children is like just behind it. Like, I mean, so it's the same, very similar for me. Now, I've been talking about how I agree with my guests all the time. This time I'm actually disagreeing with you. So
All right.
I'm going Powerage. And I have to be honest with you, a lot of it has to do with just sentimentality because this
That
I had
matters, though.
I had this record first before this one. And my friends and I we used to sing a lot of these songs in the car, like Sin
Right.
City, and What's Next to the Moon and Rock and Roll Damnation. I mean, it's just sentimental for me. That's all.
That
So
that matters.
yeah, so there's something about it. I had this first, and these songs are ingrained in and when I listen to this one, I know this one back and forth. This one I had to listen to a little bit more for this episode just to get familiar. But man, the more I listen to this, Peter, I'm with you, man. It's like this thing kills. Like
Yeah.
it's the more I'm listening to this, I'm going, man, this one's like the primal album. This is like killer.
Well, and not that this is the final measure of anything, but the tracks from Powerage that were in our set list available for the AC/DC band were Rock and Roll Damnation, Riff Raff, and Sin City, and Gone Shooting. Those were the only four that
Yeah.
were in the set list. And like I said before, the entire album of Let There Be Rock was in our set list. That's kind of hard
That
to
says it
ignore.
all. That says it all right there. That's great. And man, Dog Eat Dog live. Oh, come on. I mean, the thing is interesting is that you said the one last thing about Dog Eat Dog is that um when I listen to that track, I kind of want it to kick in because you know how he's doing he's hitting the toms. You want him
Right.
to kind of just go wham and just start wailing on and he never
There's no
does.
backbeat.
Yeah, yeah, he never does. But live, I think they do it live. But anyway, um, they kind of kick in more live. But anyway, doesn't matter. It's still an amazing song. Love it to death. And this was another great battle. So, Peter, you did an amazing job. You are obviously a huge fan.
Yeah.
Um, there's no question in my mind how big of a fan you are of AC/DC, and I love how far you dug into the songs. And I think everyone's going to enjoy this. I mean, they're going to love it just for the air guitar and air drums alone. We just did that. We couldn't help ourselves, people. We couldn't help.
We talked about this briefly before we started, and I think it's important because you mentioned your previous show, Van Halen, and I do think it's relevant because these are two bands that have two distinct eras, two completely different singers. Same with Van Halen. We look at, in this case, the Bon era is what it is, but when you go back and look at the sales, and I believe it is certified 2 million for Let There Be Rock and 1 million for Powerage. Dirty Deeds is at 7 million, and Highway to Hell is crushing, these. And so you've got, just like Van Halen, you've got Women and Children and Fair Warning not selling as much as Van Halen and Van Halen 2, and not as much as 84.
Right.
So there they are sitting in the middle, these two consecutive records, just like these two consecutive records that sometimes people kind of maybe fly over and don't spend as much time going into the deeper tracks and going through it. And, part of the reason we do these is to get you to go and listen to these records, because these albums are really worth going into all those inner tracks. If you're just a hits person, there's some really good stuff in here if you'll just take the time to go and dig it out. And I think it's also important that is unlike Van Halen's albums were really huge to begin with. These AC/DC records with Bon were not.
No, they weren't at the time. Yeah.
Highway to Hell was, because of obvious. But once Highway to Hell and then Back in Black came out and Bon passed away, everybody went back.
Yes.
And you use the analogy, rising water raises all ships. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden, all their catalog.
2 albums. Yep.
Yeah. All of a sudden, all their catalog got a much higher profile, and those numbers really went up. So they're kind of misleading because they were nowhere near, because Powerage was 131 in the US. And I think Let There Be Rock was 154.
Yeah, those aren't amazing numbers by any means. No.
These are not lighting anybody on fire at the time.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. Really, really, I'm glad you brought that up because it's really important. I mean, these albums were not, at the time, were not like, I mean, and I don't know that Atlantic was promoting them hard until Highway to Hell. Like, I don't know, maybe Atlantic was falling down.
Not so much. I don't think so. Not so much.
Yeah.
Because I think people's timelines are messed up, because they're like, oh, I heard TNT and I heard, well, you heard it later.
Heard it later, man. You heard it later. Yeah.
You didn't hear it when it came out.
Yeah.
That was not happening. You think, oh, I know that one. So you think you go back to when it was released. That's not what happened with these.
Absolutely. And Peter, you bring up a great point to wrap it up. And that is the whole point of these, people always sometimes I'll get comments about these. So like, who cares about a battle? What do you mean battle? I'm like, the battle is irregardless. It's just the whole point is just to talk about these albums.
It's
It's
a
just
metaphor.
it's a metaphor. It's just to try to raise the drama a little bit. It's really not a battle. I understand that creative is not a battle. I get that. It's just fun to talk about it as a battle, and it just all it is an excuse to talk about these albums. And so the whole point is go back and, like Peter said, go listen to these albums. Put them on and tell me what you think. You tell me your thoughts on these. We always want to hear on the comments below. Please help us out. Tell us what you think. And and as always, please like and subscribe. If you stuck with us this long, we really appreciate it. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed it. And we will and Peter, thanks again. I really appreciate it. Thank you for coming on the channel.
Thank you.
Yep. We'll definitely have you'll be back again if you want to be.
Thank
Um,
you.
so anyway, thanks again, everybody, and we'll see you next time on Curless Mania. Thank you. Bye.